Let's step back in time to ancient Greece, where mountain paths cut through wild Arcadia, and the gods still walked among mortals. In a quiet cave on Mount Cyllene, hidden from the eyes of Olympus, a child was born at dawn. By sunset, he had already left his cradle. By night, he had crossed the land, and before the next morning, he had stolen the sacred cattle of Apollo, invented music, and challenged the order of the gods. This is the true story of Hermes, the most elusive god of ancient Greece. Hermes was born in secrecy, in a shadowed cave on Mount Cyllene in Arcadia, a wild and sacred region of ancient Greece where mountains were believed to touch the divine. His mother was Maia, the eldest of the Pleiades, a quiet, secluded nymph who avoided the company of gods. His father was Zeus, ruler of Olympus, who visited her in silence during the night, away from Hera's gaze. Hermes entered the world at dawn, and nothing about him was ordinary. Ancient sources, particularly the Homeric hymn to Hermes, describe him as a child. Later sources such as the Bibliotheca describe his various heroic interventions. Hermes was a child who did not behave like a child at all. He did not cry, he did not sleep, he did not wait. Within hours of his birth, Hermes slipped out of his cradle. Already he was thinking. Already he was planning. Already he was becoming something the Greeks would later recognize as uniquely his, a god of intelligence, movement, and cleverness, rather than brute strength. Where other gods ruled through power, Hermes ruled through mind. When Hermes stepped outside the cave, he encountered his first symbol, a tortoise. But Hermes did not simply observe it, he transformed it. He hollowed its shell, stretched strings across it, and created the first lyre, an instrument that would later become sacred to Apollo and symbolic of harmony itself. This moment defined Hermes forever. He was not a god of fixed boundaries, he was a god who crossed them, child and trickster, messenger and thief, guide and deceiver, divine and human. By nightfall, on the very day he was born, Hermes had already decided to perform his first act. He would steal, not from mortals, not from spirits, but from Apollo, the radiant god of prophecy, order, and light. The youngest god of Olympus was about to challenge one of its most powerful, and he would do it with a smile. Hermes left the cave of Mount Cyllene and walked across the rugged lands of Arcadia, moving with a purpose that seemed impossible for one so newly alive. The ancient poets describe him as silent, deliberate, and astonishingly clever, not reckless, but calculating. Hermes had chosen his target carefully. Far away, in Pieria, grazed the sacred cattle of Apollo, divine animals belonging to the god of light, prophecy, and order. They were not ordinary cattle. They symbolized harmony, wealth, and divine authority. To steal from Apollo was to challenge cosmic balance itself. But Hermes was not interested in strength. He was interested in intelligence. When he reached the herd, he did something no thief had ever done. He made the cattle walk backwards. By reversing their tracks, Hermes created footprints that appeared to lead toward the meadow rather than away from it. Anyone following the trail would be misled, a detail recorded in the Homeric hymn to Hermes, one of the earliest sources describing his myth. Even Hermes himself disguised his own tracks. He bound branches beneath his feet, blurring the ground so that no clear footprints remained. This was more than trickery. It was symbolic. Hermes was redefining movement, not simply traveling from one place to another, but bending perception itself. The Greeks would later associate him with crossroads, boundaries, and transitions. All spaces where direction becomes uncertain. He drove the cattle through the night, until he reached the banks of the river Alpheos. There, he performed another remarkable act. He slaughtered 2 of the sacred animals. Hermes divided the meat into 12 portions, 1 for each of the gods. But at the time, there were only 11 Olympians. Hermes included a share for himself, quietly asserting his future place among them. It was the first recorded sacrificial ritual performed by a god. Yet Hermes did not eat the meat. Though tempted, he resisted, because he was still an infant god, and divine law forbade him from consuming the offering. Instead, he burned the portions, creating smoke that rose toward the heavens. Fire, sacrifice, and ritual, all introduced by the youngest of the gods. When he finished, Hermes hid the remaining cattle, erased his tracks once more, and returned to Mount Cyllene before dawn. He climbed back into his cradle, wrapped himself in blankets, and pretended to sleep. Hermes, newborn, silent, and smiling, waited for the confrontation. When morning came, Apollo noticed immediately that something was wrong. The sacred cattle were gone. Apollo was not merely a god of light, he was a god of prophecy, perception, and divine awareness. He followed the strange tracks left behind, but they made no sense. The footprints appeared reversed, the trail shifted and vanished, the ground itself seemed to lie. This was not the work of an ordinary thief. Eventually, Apollo's search led him toward Arcadia and to the quiet cave of Maya. Inside, he found the most unlikely suspect imaginable, a newborn child, wrapped tightly in blankets, lying peacefully in a cradle. Apollo accused Hermes immediately, but Hermes did not panic. He did not confess. He did not even sit up. Instead, he spoke calmly, innocently, and with astonishing composure for a being only hours old. He denied everything. He told Apollo he was just a baby, born yesterday, too small to walk, too weak to steal cattle, too young to even know what cattle were. The Homeric hymn to Hermes describes Hermes' response as playful but deliberate. He argued his case like a seasoned speaker, blending truth and deception so smoothly that even Apollo hesitated. This moment is essential to understanding Hermes. He was not simply a trickster, he was a master of language. Hermes represented persuasion, negotiation, ambiguity, the power of words to shape reality. Later, Greeks would associate him with rhetoric, diplomacy, and interpretation, all skills that depend on flexible meaning. Apollo, however, was not convinced. He lifted the child from the cradle and carried him to Olympus, demanding judgment from Zeus himself. Before the king of the gods, the newborn Hermes continued his performance. He swore he was innocent. He claimed he had never even left the cave. He insisted Apollo must be mistaken. Zeus listened, and then he laughed. The laughter of Zeus is significant. It appears in ancient sources not as mockery, but as recognition. Zeus saw in Hermes something familiar: intelligence, cunning, and boldness. These were qualities Zeus himself often used to maintain power. Zeus did not punish Hermes. Instead, he ordered him to reveal the truth. The infant god realized the game was over, and so, still calm, still smiling, Hermes agreed to lead them to the hidden cattle. But before Apollo could reclaim what was his, Hermes had one more surprise prepared, one that would transform rivalry into alliance and change the balance of the Olympian gods forever. Hermes led Apollo and Zeus across the land to the place where the cattle had been hidden. Apollo's anger had not faded. To him, this was not simply theft, it was an insult. A challenge from a god who had not even existed the day before. The order of Olympus had been disturbed, and Apollo expected restitution. But Hermes had anticipated this moment. Before Apollo could speak, Hermes reached into his swaddling cloth and drew out something unexpected: a small, shining instrument crafted from a tortoise shell, stretched with strings of gut. The lyre. Hermes began to play. The sound was unlike anything the gods had heard before. The notes were soft, yet precise, structured yet fluid, a balance between spontaneity and order. The music seemed to settle the air itself, calming tension and reshaping emotion. Apollo listened. The god of prophecy and reason, who embodied harmony and cosmic structure, heard in the lyre something that reflected his own nature. The instrument created order from vibration, beauty from improvisation. His anger began to fade. According to the Homeric hymn to Hermes, Apollo became captivated. He asked Hermes where the instrument had come from. Hermes explained how he had fashioned it from the tortoise he encountered on the day of his birth. In that moment, the relationship between the two gods shifted. No longer thief and victim, but rivals becoming partners. Apollo offered a trade. He would forgive the theft of the cattle if Hermes gave him the lyre. Hermes agreed immediately. The exchange was more than practical, it was symbolic. Hermes gave Apollo music and harmony, while Apollo would later grant Hermes authority and recognition among the gods. This is one of the earliest examples in Greek mythology of exchange replacing conflict. Rather than punishment, negotiation resolves the dispute, a theme that becomes central to Hermes' identity as mediator and messenger. Apollo accepted the lyre and made it sacred to himself. From then on, the instrument became one of his primary symbols, associated with poetry, prophecy, and divine order. But Apollo did not leave Hermes empty-handed. In return, he gave Hermes a shepherd's staff, a simple rod that Hermes would later transform into one of the most recognizable symbols in Greek mythology, the beginnings of the caduceus. With this exchange, Hermes was no longer merely a trickster child. He had negotiated with one of Olympus's most powerful gods and emerged not punished, but elevated. The newborn god had secured his place among the Olympians. But his role was still evolving. Hermes would soon become something greater, not just a clever deity, but the one who moved freely between all realms, between gods and mortals, between life and death, between order and chaos. After their reconciliation, Apollo did more than forgive Hermes. He recognized him. The youngest of the gods had proven something rare, not strength, not prophecy, but intelligence combined with adaptability. Hermes could move between opposites, truth and deception, conflict and harmony, youth and authority. To acknowledge this, Apollo granted Hermes a shepherd's staff. At first it was simple, a rod used by herdsmen to guide animals. But in Hermes' hands, it transformed into something far more symbolic. According to later traditions, Hermes once encountered two serpents locked in combat. He placed the staff between them, and the snakes coiled peacefully around it, creating balance instead of conflict. This image became the caduceus, a staff entwined with serpents, representing mediation, balance, and negotiation. The symbolism is precise. Hermes was not a god of one domain. He existed at intersections. The Greeks associated Hermes with boundaries. Stone pillars known as Hermes, carved with his head, were placed along roads, at city entrances, and at the edges of properties. The Hermes scandal, when Hermes were mutilated before the Sicilian expedition, show how important they were. Damaging them was seen as threatening travel and protection. Travelers prayed to Hermes before journeys. Merchants invoked him before trade. Even thieves called upon him, not because he encouraged crime, but because he governed cleverness and risk. Hermes represented movement. He crossed mountains, entered cities, walked among mortals, and traveled freely between Olympus and the underworld. This mobility made him essential. Soon, Zeus assigned him a role that only Hermes could fulfill. He would become the messenger of the gods. With winged sandals, later known as the talaria, and a traveler's hat, Hermes could move faster than any other deity. He carried divine commands from Olympus to the mortal world, but also guided communication in the opposite direction. He became interpreter, mediator, and envoy. But Hermes' most profound duty was still to come, because there was one boundary more mysterious than all others, the boundary between life and death. And Hermes alone would be trusted to cross it. Among all his roles, one stands apart. Hermes was not only messenger, trickster, and protector of travelers. He was also the guide of the dead. The Greeks called this role psychopomp, the conductor of souls. When mortals died, their spirits did not wander aimlessly. They were escorted, led gently from the world of the living to the threshold of the underworld. And it was Hermes who performed this task. Unlike darker deities associated with death, Hermes was not feared in this role. He carried a golden wand, sometimes described as capable of inducing sleep or awakening, and with it, he led spirits downward, toward the realm of Hades. Ancient texts frequently depict Hermes escorting groups of souls after great events. In the Odyssey, he leads the spirits of the slain suitors to the underworld. The imagery is calm, almost pastoral, Hermes guiding them like a shepherd guiding a flock. This comparison is intentional. Just as he guided cattle in his first myth, he now guided souls. To the Greeks, Hermes represented not the destination, but the journey. He was the one who walked beside travelers when the road was uncertain, the one who moved quietly through doorways others feared to cross. And because he could cross every boundary, Hermes became indispensable. Zeus trusted him with delicate missions. Gods relied on him to resolve conflict. Mortals prayed to him before journeys both physical and spiritual. But Hermes was not only guide and messenger, he was also a protector of human activity, especially those shaped by risk, speed, and exchange. Trade, travel, communication. The world of movement belonged to Hermes. Merchants prayed to Hermes before trade. Athletes called upon him for agility and speed. Even shepherds and farmers honored him, remembering his earliest association with cattle and rural life. This connection to human activity made Hermes unusually accessible. He represented skill, adaptability, and quick thinking, qualities valued in daily survival rather than divine grandeur. Hermes also became the patron of communication. Speech, negotiation, persuasion, all fell under his influence. The Greeks believed that eloquence itself was a gift of Hermes, and orators sometimes invoked him before public speaking. He was associated not only with truth, but with interpretation, the ability to translate meaning between individuals. This is reflected in the word hermeneutics, derived from his name, the art of interpretation. Hermes was also linked to commerce and exchange. Trade required trust between strangers, movement across distances, and negotiation of value, all domains aligned with his character. Markets and public squares often contained Hermes, the stone markers bearing his image, reminding participants of fair boundaries and agreed limits. Yet Hermes' connection to risk meant he also became associated with thieves. This was not because he encouraged wrongdoing, but because he embodied cunning and strategy. In Greek thought, intelligence could be used for many purposes, and Hermes governed the skill itself, not its moral direction. He protected travelers from deception, but also understood deception. This duality made him one of the most complex Olympians. Hermes also played a crucial role in heroic myths, acting as helper and guide. When heroes faced impossible tasks, it was often Hermes who provided tools, directions, or subtle assistance. He helped Perseus defeat Medusa by guiding him toward the nymphs who possessed magical objects. He aided Odysseus by giving him the herb moly, protecting him from Circe's magic. In these stories, Hermes does not fight battles himself. He enables others. He provides knowledge, timing, and strategy, reinforcing his identity as a god of intelligence and movement rather than force. To mortals, Hermes was both protector and teacher. He represented the ability to navigate uncertainty, to think quickly, to cross boundaries safely. But Hermes' story does not end with his roles, because behind all his functions, messenger, guide, patron, lies a deeper symbolism. Hermes was the embodiment of transition itself. To the ancient Greeks, Hermes was more than a messenger. He represented a principle, movement. While other gods embodied fixed forces, the sea, the sky, the harvest, Hermes embodied transition. He existed wherever something changed from one state to another, at dawn and dusk, at crossroads, at borders between cities. At the moment a soul left the body. These were all spaces where Hermes was believed to be present. This is why Hermes, stone pillars bearing his head, were placed at boundaries. They did not merely mark territory. They symbolized safe passage through uncertainty. When travelers saw them, they were reminded that transitions required awareness, intelligence, and adaptability. Hermes also represented communication between different worlds. He carried messages from Zeus to mortals, guided souls to Hades, helped heroes navigate magical realms. In each case, Hermes translated meaning across boundaries. He ensured that information, people, and even souls could move without chaos. This function made him essential to cosmic balance. Without Hermes, the gods would remain isolated. Mortals would lose guidance. Souls would wander. He was the connective force of mythology. Hermes also embodied paradox. He was honest, yet deceptive, helpful, yet mischievous, divine, yet deeply connected to human life. The Greeks did not see this as contradiction. They saw it as complexity. Hermes governed situations where rules were flexible: trade, travel, negotiation, areas where rigid order could not apply. This made him one of the most psychologically nuanced deities in Greek mythology. He was not about power. He was about intelligence in motion. Even his symbols reflect this. Winged sandals represent speed. The traveler's hat symbolizes journey. The caduceus represents balance between opposing forces. Together they form a portrait of a god who does not dominate, but navigates. Hermes moves, he adapts, he connects, and because of this, he remained one of the most widely honored gods across the Greek world, from mountain paths to bustling cities. He was the unseen companion of every journey, the quiet guide at every threshold, the god who walked between worlds. If you enjoyed this journey into the world of ancient mythology, like, comment, and subscribe to Ancient Untold Stories. And until the next story, may your path be guided and your journey protected.